What is up, guys, and at long last, welcome to the Final Destination review series. First of all, it's been a while since I've done a review series of older horror films, so it's good to be back. But second, this is a review series specifically that I have been wanting to do for a few years now, but they talked about Final Destination 6 coming out a few years back, and then I never really heard much else, and then it was supposed to come out the next year, and the next year, and so I kept delaying things, wanting to put it off to kind of have the hype built up to Final Destination 6, and now finally, we are just about a week away from Final Destination Bloodlines becoming a reality. So we're kicking this bitch off. We're gonna have two of these videos dropping this week, and then basically almost every day next week leading up to the release of the new film. And I also have a couple of really cool ranking videos planned. I'm going to rank all of the premonitions, like the initial big accidents, and then I'm going to do a big fat ass tier list ranking every single death in the Final Destination franchise. And hopefully YouTube isn't a bitch and age restricts and demonetizes this one, because it's going to be a workload. But the original Final Destination was released in 2000. I was 10 years old. I remember very vividly seeing the trailer for this in the movie theaters and thinking that looks awesome, and finally going to check this out with my dad in theaters and having it be awesome. Final Destination, as well as probably Saw, were the two franchises that felt like they really were built and became a reality as I was growing up. And so this is really a millennial horror classic for me. This is one that was one of those formative movies that was something new. It was horror cutting its teeth and going in a new direction, and still having a lot of those classic slasher type elements that I grew up loving. And the premise of this film is that you've got Alex Browning, played by Devon Sawa, who is going on this Boeing 747 on a class field trip with a bunch of classmates to Paris. And he gets a premonition that the plane is going to violently explode upon takeoff, and he freaks out, gets off the plane. A number of students go with him, and then moments after they are safely off the plane, his premonition comes true, which is great enough of an idea, but death was not done with them. So as all these people are starting to have that survivor's guilt, death comes back for them one by one and kills them in the order that they should have died in the original plane crash. And starting off with my positives for the original Final Destination, you got to give the flowers to that awesome premise. Now, this was something that was originally pitched or written as an idea for an X-Files episode, but was eventually passed off and was created into what became a full-length movie titled Final Destination. And I just love all aspects of this premise. First of all, just somebody having a premonition of impending death and then that coming true. Like, that's a good enough premise to kick off a movie no matter what. But having that extra slasher style element in there of death coming back for them and killing them in all these gnarly, violent ways in the order that they would have died in the plane crash, as if it's trying to correct this little rift in fate, is such an unbelievably smart way to revitalize slashers and the horror scene of the time that it's no wonder this became such a popular franchise, because that premise is just a massive hook. And I love the fact that in a lot of ways, as I've already said a couple times, this does function as a slasher film. You have a group of teenagers who are one by one being picked off in these gnarly ways, only there's no masked killer who is stalking them. There's nobody that they can see, that they can run from, that they can hide from, that they can fight back against. It's just death itself. It's in the air. It's the universe is coming after them. And so quite literally, as Tony Todd's character says it, there are no escapes. And that just brings a really unique brand of tension to a movie like this, where you're not looking through the killer's POV, you're not seeing them outside the classroom standing across the street staring at the final girl. There's no campground or lake or wrong turn off the beaten path that we're watching our characters stray down that's going to be their impending doom. It's just something that's going to happen, and when it happens, where it happens, and how it happens is anybody's fucking guess until it happens. And of course, one of the most signature elements to the Final Destination franchise that we all love is the style of all of the kills, all the carnage candy, which a lot of people have likened to Rube Goldberg machines, where you'll have somebody in a room and they'll set a coffee cup down and it starts to leak condensation, which causes a marble to roll, which knocks over a telephone, and that hits a broom, that hits a boiling pot of water and sends it into their face. Or all of these really seemingly unique and unrelated elements within a room that have to work together in tandem to create some seemingly accidental gory death. And not only is it just cool to watch how they plan and execute these things out, but it's very cool and really creating another form of tension where you as the viewer don't know what exactly is going to happen. You don't know what is going to cause the death. And even in some of the better ones, you have a lot of fake outs where you feel like something's going to happen and then it doesn't. And then later on, somewhere else in the room, something else is activated that actually is the bringer of death. It's just something that is really fun if you're a carnivore to watch, because traditionally in slasher films, the questions that you're asking that you're waiting for the movie to answer is who's going to die and what weapon are they going to use to kill them. And in here, you know exactly who's going to die. You know the order that they're going to be picked off, and it's very obvious whenever you are in the scene that somebody is going to bite it. But you're just sitting there waiting for how. Now, admittedly, some of the kills in this film have aged a little poorly compared to some of the sequels, just because it is an older film. It is from the 2000s, so you do have some early 2000s CGI and makeup work and things like that certainly show its age a bit, but having that nostalgia factor does shield me from a bit of that. And I do think you get a lot of really great kills here. Like you get the one with Val Lewton, the teacher, which is probably the most extravagant as far as all the different pieces working together and not knowing exactly how she's going to die. It's very drawn out. You get the one that was one of the craziest jump moments of my youth, which is when the chick gets just creamed by that bus out of nowhere. I specifically remember a friend of mine from elementary school coming over to spend the night. And I was always like this bad influence when it came to movies. So if I knew that a kid didn't typically watch movies like horror films or, American Pie or something like that, I would put it in. So I'll be the one to show you this shit. I will introduce you to how cool this world is that you're forbidden from, my friend. And so we were watching Final Destination, and I just remember looking at him, waiting for that bus to hit. And it was just a view of his face, and you just hear, and he goes, and just holds that face for a solid 90 seconds. I swear to God, I remember it like it was yesterday. And going along with the kills, I think that the initial premonition, the plane crash, is executed very well too. It's very extravagant. You have a lot of gore in there. You got people being sucked out the side. You have things cracking people in their head, people flinging forward, flying upside down, a big explosion, faces melting. It's definitely a very vivid, a very creative way to visualize a plane crash. Very easily it could just explode, but no, it takes its time showing how each individual person is going to die very slowly before the whole thing just fucking implodes. An element of the story that for some reason is pretty much exclusive to this first film, it hasn't really been explored much at all in the sequels, that I really enjoy is the FBI investigation afterwards, where you have a very peculiar situation where something that would obviously bring in the FBI and TSA and everything, a plane exploding, while somebody who was just aboard the plane warned everybody it was going to happen, got him and his friends off. Clearly there's some government agency that's going to look at that and say, feels like that person probably had something to do with it. So I thought that was a very realistic subplot to have going on. And it's kind of a secondary threat where Alex feels the threat of death. He wants to help everybody. He wants to try to get through to everybody. He even goes to Val Lewton's house at one point to try to check her tires. But he also has this secondary threat of the FBI watching every move that he makes, and eventually has to go into hiding because all these people around him are dying and he's the prime suspect. So that's an element that I think brings a lot of a good plot to this film that kind of makes some of the sequels honestly feel a little emptier on a story level. And finally, I really enjoyed the cast here. Not to give away, again, my thoughts on the sequels coming up, but I do think that this film has possibly the strongest cast as far as the Final Destination films go. Now, they are playing caricatures. You have the off the beaten path girl who's kind of the loner, and then you have the cheerleader type. You got the jock douchebag. You got the guy who gets beat up by the jock douchebag every time he sees him. And so it's not like they're reinventing the wheel with these characters, but I like the actors, I like the personalities that they bring to them, and even the ones that are the most extreme caricatures and cliches of slasher films, like the jock douchebag. I think Kara Smith brings enough little charm there. Of course, this film is led by Devon Sawa as the lead here, Alex Browning. I was always a huge fan of him growing up from things like Little Giants and, the little bit in Casper, then of course Idle Hands and this. And, it's unfortunate I haven't had the best interaction with him as an adult, but I'll always have some nostalgia for his older work. I'm always going to love films like this. And I think that he's a really good lead. Ali Larter, I always liked her. She was pretty hot there in the 2000s with things like this and Jay and Silent Bob and a few other things. And even Sean William Scott. You got Stifler in here, who is one of the only roles that he had in this time period that was kind of against typecast, where he was always the jock douchebag or the funny guy or the popular guy because of the popularity of the Stifler character. And this is the one time that he kind of played the opposite of that, where he's just kind of like the nerdy guy, the awkward guy who gets beat up by the Stifler type. So he brings a really fun element here, regardless of whether or not he's like the comedic drive of the film. Just his personality brings something. So I've always enjoyed this film for that 2000s cast. And, some of that is definitely nostalgia that's just working for me here. Moving on to the mixed, one of the main things that really caught my eye this time rewatching it is all of the additional premonitions that Alex has throughout the film. It kind of feels a little bit lazy because of the way that they've explored it in some of the sequels. Maybe back in the day I didn't have any problem with it, but the fact that he just has like these random visions of like a train coming at him, or he sees the reflection of a bus, it just doesn't feel as creative as they developed that element later on in the films. Even him having the seatbelt that's ripped and then it's back together, just, I don't know. It functions fine in the film, but it causes more questions for me personally about what exactly is causing this like rift in reality here. And even just the visual of images coming at him, it just feels early 2000s. So it works fine in the film, doesn't detract from how much I love it, but I feel like they definitely improved that factor in a couple of the later films. I've also always been very in the middle about Alex and Clear as a couple. I think their chemistry is fine. I think that Devon Sawa and Ali Larter work fine together. And, there is something about having the girl who's like the loner actually get a guy, actually hook up with somebody that works for her. That it's a kind of a classic element of like coming of age high school film. So I appreciate that. But I think because of the way that they had to change the narrative of this film through test screenings and through the editing, that element of the film, that budding romance, feels very incomplete. There was a deleted scene where she goes and she meets Alex and he's kind of sitting on the beach where they start making out and then I guess presumably probably fuck right there on the beach. That was deleted, and so you don't get any hints of them having like a budding romance in that moment in the actual theatrical cut. And for those that might not know, the original ending of this film has Alex die in the third act, and then Clear goes on months later to have his baby, and it's kind of like this warm and fuzzy ending. And so I think that there was an original version of this film that probably developed out their budding romance a bit better, but it was the worst version of the film. So they cut a lot of things out, and so what we're left with is, for me, kind of an incomplete feeling romantic subplot here. It works okay, but it should be stronger. It should fit together a little better for me. And the only other mixed element I have is probably going to get me in a lot of trouble in the comment section, and that's Tony Todd's scene. This is a scene that if you take Tony Todd out of it, I think all of us would agree makes no sense within the narrative. It's completely out of nowhere. It is an absolute nonsensical exposition dump, and all it does is raise so many questions that, to date, all the way 5 films in, we have no answers to who the fuck this mortician is. Like, is he the Grim Reaper himself? Is he somebody that controls death? We have no fucking idea to this day. But, this is a scene that it's cool because it's Tony Todd, and that's the only reason. You get Tony Todd's presence, you get Tony Todd's voice. With death, there are no accidents, no coincidences, and no escapes. You don't even want to fuck with that Mac Daddy. It's badass because it's Tony Todd. But just think about it. Take Tony Todd out, it's just some random fucking dude. So they just go to the morgue to check out Todd's body for reasons, and then there's a guy there, random Mortician A, who suddenly has all the answers to the universe and gives them all the rules of the universe and everything that they need to know to cheat and survive death and how death works. It's absolutely lazy writing. And so I like the scene because Tony Todd's in it. You take Tony Todd out of it, it fucking sucks. And all of us, if we were like reviewing it today, that's the one scene everybody would call out of like, that was fucking lazy as hell. You couldn't think of any other organic way to give us the rules besides some dude just giving it to us for no reason. Anyway, rest in peace, Tony Todd. I love you. Can't wait to see you in the 6th film.
I'll see you soon.
Now moving on to the negatives, and my first two are pretty minor. I've always disliked the soundtrack to this movie. Not necessarily the score. I think the score that runs throughout this franchise is pretty good, but the actual music soundtrack. Now, when you have a film that's from the late 90s, early 2000s, that's a very nostalgic era for me. That's my teenage years. Those are my formative years. And so there's usually really awesome music from that era in a lot of classic horror films from the 2000s, whether it be Creed or Stained or all the new metal bands. And you just don't get any of that here. Like, all the songs they picked are fucking weird. They're odd. Like, I've never heard of them before or since this movie. And so, I don't know. They don't even fit in the scene that they're in. So I've just never liked the soundtrack. I feel like it was a huge missed opportunity for a 2000s horror classic like this. Another thing that I actually only noticed this time upon rewatch, there's a very odd look that this film has. It almost has like a pseudo lens flare effect where everything is very bright and kind of overexposed, and there's certain like white glow around characters to a certain degree. And I watched this thing, on HBO Max in high resolution, so it's not like I watched a bad copy of it. It's just there's some kind of old look that they went for this that kind of have this glowy vibe, like almost like Scream 4, like that Vaseline look on the camera to a certain extent that doesn't age so well. One thing that bugged me that has more to do with like selling me on a character and selling me on their relationships with others is that I found it very peculiar watching it this time that Devon Sawa's character really doesn't have any genuine emotional reaction when his best friend dies, who's literally the first person who gets killed after the plane crash. He's more worried about arguing with the dad than he is grieving his best friend. Like, that whole scene played very strange to me, which I don't remember it ever doing that before, where he's supposed to have this very tight-knit relationship with this guy. It's his best friend. He's going to go with him on the plane, sit next to him. His dad knows him as his best friend. He's distraught about, him not having much of a relationship with him after the plane crash because his dad is so weirded out about Alex. And then the kid dies, and he's just like, oh, that sucks. Even when they see his body in the morgue, he doesn't have any reaction. So I don't know if that's the way that they just wrote it. Maybe that's the way that they directed. I don't know if maybe that was some kind of a fault in Devon Sawa's acting. I really don't know. But that was something that when I watched it this time, I was like, that is odd that they didn't put some kind of an emotional moment in there for a character that he's supposed to be so close with. Now, with those minor gripes notwithstanding, the one major issue that I do have with this film is that they have to cheat quite a bit to make the third act work. And a lot of that is a product of the fact that they had to completely reshoot and rewrite this ending after negative test screenings. As I said, they already had an original ending that was going to end in more this somber, bittersweet, romantic angle. They got blasted in all the test screenings saying the movie was great until the last 15 minutes. And so they went back and they reshot the entire thing after Alex grabs the electrical wire and is flung backwards. That was all reshot, everything in Paris, all like the 6 months later, whatever the hell it was, at the end of the film. Now, I like the actual ending of this film. I think that's definitely the better ending, and I think it absolutely saved this movie and turned it into the success that spawned this franchise. But because it was a rewritten and reshot ending, they kind of had to stick some square pegs in some round holes to make it all work. So, first of all, I've never really been able to make heads or tails of the whole thing about Alex coming to some kind of realization that he didn't change his seat in the premonition, and so he's supposed to sit behind Todd when in his premonition he did change seats. So he even in Paris has the map, the diagram drawn out, and he has a crossed out next to Todd where he didn't actually sit and has his X in the back. That's never made sense to me because no matter what, he would have been sitting next to Todd. So how they messed that up or how they were trying to get us to buy into that as a way to kind of shift and have a surprise of, oh, it's actually clear who's next in the third act has never worked for me. The whole thing about Alex grabbing the electrical wire and being flung backwards, per the rules of this franchise, he should have died. So, like, obviously they intended that to be that way, but then they had to change it. So I get it and I can forgive it. But it doesn't make a whole lot of sense that he survived that, given that he was next on the list. So, okay, he saves Claire, and then death would have skipped her and went right to him as he was holding onto this wire and got flown backwards. And so, again, just something where you really have to cheat. You have to kind of negate the rules of your own movie to get us where you want to take us narratively. And the last one is one that is a little harder for me to get past, but it's in the last 5 minutes of the film, so it's not enough to really sit there and gripe about, is that Carter is just suddenly no longer a douchebag. hates Alex with a burning fucking passion the entire movie, and Alex hating him with the exception of liking him enough to save his life. And suddenly, 6 months later, him, Alex, and Clear are all best friends hanging out in Paris with no explanation, no context given. So that's another one where it's just like there's a scene missing there. There's some kind of a connective tissue between getting us from point A to point B that I would like to have, because it just feels like such a leap to suddenly have this guy have a about face completely with his personality. So just those things just kind of stack up a lot in the last 15 minutes of this film, and just starts to have a lot of big logic issues, possibly even plot holes that I wish wasn't there. Movie still works, ending still works overall, so you know it's a necessary evil, I guess, but I really wish they could have found a way to fit those pieces together a little better and still get to the place that they wanted to by the end of the film. All in all, guys, this thing definitely has some age on it. There's certainly some flaws in the storytelling, but I'm nostalgic as hell for this first film, and it was absolutely a movie that I loved when I first saw it, and I always enjoy it every single time that I rewatch it. So Final Destination, to me, is an absolute classic of the 2000s, and if you haven't seen it, you should check it out, even though I spoiled the living fuck out of it in this review, so oops. Should have got on that. It's old as hell. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed that, click over here for all of my 2025 new release reviews. I'm also going to put a playlist up here of all of my Final Destination reviews, which upon release of this video, will only have this video in it. But if you're watching this in the future, you should have all 6 of them in there, and I'll put my rankings in there as well. So like, share, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss all of that stuff in the future. As always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.